Inside us, as human beings, are deep longings. Longings for significance, acceptance, security. These things that give us joy and peace in our experience of life. But maybe we could summarize it all up in this way, that as human beings, we are searching for meaning. We're searching for truth. We see that so much in our world today, even in how we have redefined what truth is. We're searching for value. We're searching for purpose. We're ultimately searching for hope. And the reality is that increasingly in our Western world, people are experiencing those things less and less. The research company Gallup does a study every year on the level of satisfaction that Americans feel. And in this year, 2025, they recorded the lowest percentage in the history of their study. It is that 44% or less of Americans feel at least somewhat satisfied with their life. There's a restlessness in us as human beings to find these longings of our soul. And in our world, we have access to more things than we've ever had. We own and have access to more things than we've ever had, and yet these longings go largely unfulfilled. We throw ourselves into our work or our pursuit of work. We throw ourselves into relationships. We throw ourselves into trying to be productive and trying to perform for others in hopes that we find that. And really what it does is it creates a restlessness, an anchorless existence. This, of course, is not new to modern America or to humanity as a whole. We can find stories like this that date all the way back into the annals of history. In the mid-4th century, there was a man who was searching for these things and threw himself into all kinds of things, academic pursuits, carousing in life, all kinds of indulgence, and in so doing could not find any of it. He described himself as restless. His words, not mine. And he said of his this restlessness that it was like a deep longing or a deep ache that nothing in this world could soothe. In the midst of it, as he was trying to find meaning, he heard a voice say, "Tole lege." You say, what does that mean? Well, in his language, that meant, come and read. And he picked up his Bible, and he began reading in Romans, and found a proximity to Jesus that he said led to a deep rest for his soul that he never found elsewhere. His name? We call him today St. Augustine, one of the great fathers of the church, who has famously written that my soul was restless until it found its rest in God. Of course, this story is not just for the 4th century. It extends all through humanity. There was a very prolific writer, an avowed atheist, who attempted to find meaning and significance in all aspects of life. His rigor in academia, his professorship in Oxford, and in his relationships and his works, his performance, his writings. And in all these places, he tasted this satisfaction that he called joy. He could taste it, he said, but he could never grab it. He said that his pursuit of joy was like a deep desire that nothing in this world could satisfy. And his friend J.R.R. Tolkien, amongst others, asked C.S. Lewis to come near and see Jesus. And in Jesus, Lewis found the deepest longings of his heart. Famously writing in his book, Mere Christianity, that if you are searching for something, my paraphrase, you get the real thing. If you are searching for something in your soul and you are finding that this world can't satisfy it, it probably means that you were made for a different world. That you were made for a different experience of satisfaction. Both Lewis and Augustine found their satisfaction, found their meaning, found truth by coming near to Jesus. And what we find in the stories of Jesus in the Bible is Jesus' constant invitation to people like you and me to come near to him, and in so doing, to find satisfaction for the deepest longings of our soul. As we launch into a new series, we are going to be asking the same question over and over again. Would you be willing to come near to Jesus, to come and see who he is, what he has done, what he is doing, and perhaps find who you really are? The invitation of Jesus is to come and see. And this invitation is not just something I've paraphrased in this moment. It's an invitation that Jesus begins giving almost immediately in his earthly ministry. If you have a copy of the scriptures, you can turn to John chapter 1. If not, no worries, we'll have it on the screen for you. John chapter 1, verse 35. This is the beginning of Jesus' ministry as recorded in the Gospel of John. This is what he says. He said, the next day, John, this is John the Baptist, if you're familiar with him, was there again with two of his disciples. So John has disciples of him, and he's doing his ministry. And he sees Jesus passing by, and he says, look, the Lamb of God. And when his two disciples heard him say that, they followed Jesus. Turning around, Jesus saw them and asked, what do you want? And they said, Rabbi, which means teacher, where are you staying? Come, he replied, and see. So they went and saw where he was staying, and they spent that day with him. It was about 4 p.m. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of the two who heard what John had said and who had followed Jesus. The first thing Andrew did was to find his brother Simon and tell him, we have found the Messiah, that is, the Christ. And he brought him to Jesus. And Jesus looked at him and said, you are Simon, son of John, but you will be called Cephas, which, when translated, is Peter. The next day, Jesus decided to leave for Galilee. Finding Philip, he said, follow me. And Philip, like Andrew and Peter, was from the town of Bethsaida. Philip found Nathanael and told him, we have found the one Moses wrote about in the law, and about whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. Nazareth? Can anything good come from there? Nathanael asked. We sometimes ask that in Bethlehem too. Come and see, said Philip. When Jesus saw Nathanael approaching, he said of him, here truly is an Israelite in whom there is no deceit. How do you know me? Nathanael asked. And Jesus said, I saw you when you were still under a fig tree before Philip ever called you. Nathanael declared, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. And Jesus said, you believe because I told you I saw you under a fig tree. But you will see even greater things than that. He said, very truly, I tell you, you'll see heaven open, the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. Word of God for for the people of God. We have in the story of these four early followers of Jesus, these four disciples, stories of human beings just like you and me who are searching, longing for truth, longing for restoration, longing for rescue. They were longing for what Jewish people in the first century world called the Messiah. And what that meant was the one who was going to restore Israel back to their experience of the fullness of life. If you were with us over the last 8 months, we slogged through the book of Kings. We got to see what that full life looked like, and then we got to see Israel lose it. The search for Messiah is to return back to that, the place where they have peace and joy and their inner longings are satisfied. But that is done because God lives with them and is close to them. They're searching for this in the same way we're searching. And they stumble into Jesus, and Jesus says two things to them, right? And we have to be very careful how we read this, right? Because we could read it in a northeastern voice of contempt. What do you want, right? You've all given that phrase before, and you've all heard that phrase before. We're going to go out on a limb and suggest Jesus didn't use that tone in this moment. Instead, why does he ask that question? What do you want? Because he, at the very beginning, is acknowledging that they are searching for something. Jesus is well aware of that. It's why he's made himself available. He's acknowledging it to them and to him, and in so doing, suggesting that in him might be the answers to the things they're longing for. That is that Jesus' first message to someone like me and you is not, here's who I am, deal with it. It is, what are you actually hoping for? What are you longing for? What is it deep inside you that you are after? That is why I've come. Of course, he quickly follows that up with a come and see invitation. Come and see. And Jesus' invitation is important, right? Because he invites these seekers to himself. He does not invite them to anything ancillary or secondary. That is, that Jesus doesn't say, oh, if you do these religious activities and ceremonies, then you'll be on your way to something. He doesn't give them a bunch of propositions or a set of doctrines or beliefs and say, hey, if you agree to these things and believe these things, then that's how you'll find the true longings that you have. He also doesn't say to them, hey, you've actually got to get your life in order. And if you at least begin to put the pieces together, and then you can come and find these things. Jesus doesn't say any of that. It's easy for us to look over that and to miss the core truth of this. That ultimately what Jesus is offering the world is not religion, it's not perfection, it's himself. And here's the problem, friends. All too often, the church, as the bearers of that message in this day, has made Jesus cloudy to an onlooking world because we have added to Jesus' invitation. We've said, come and see Jesus, but believe these things first. Come and see Jesus, but you better get your life in order before you get too close. Come and see Jesus, maybe, is what we say to people as a church. We have unnecessarily and unfortunately made Jesus at times difficult to find for people. At Hope, we are far from perfect. In fact, we oftentimes, in describing our church, lead with the fact that we are not anywhere close to perfect. But realizing these truths, one of the things that we have tried to embrace as a community, as a family, is this identity of simply Jesus. That is that when you come here, what we want you to see is Jesus, not anything extra. Now, once you engage with Jesus, there are other things that Jesus calls you to, but nothing should get in the way of you seeing Jesus for who he is. That means for us that secondary things stay secondary. That means for us that we are very careful to make Jesus the main thing when we gather. Hopefully, anytime you hear me or anyone else up here in the front, the name Jesus is not just a passing thing, but the whole point of the talk that we're giving. That the songs we sing are not just musically well done and not just compelling as melodies, but in their whole engagement with you are pointing you to Jesus. This is the ultimate invitation of Jesus. And so I say this on two sides, right? For those of you who are just engaging to this, and we say, welcome to this community, and we're so glad you're here, and we just want you to see Jesus. And then for those of you who've been here for a while, it's a two-sided thing, right? One, we still want you to just see Jesus, but you need to help us make sure we're just showing people Jesus and not all the other stuff. This is the invitation of Jesus. But there's more to it than that, isn't it? Because ultimately, the one question the people, the followers, the disciples, the initial disciples are asking is, hey, where are you staying? That's a bold question, right? Is that Jesus says, come and see to that. In other words, he's inviting them over, right? That's a big deal in society, isn't it? Letting someone inside your house. Oh, by the way, Jesus at this time, perhaps living in a tent on the outskirts of town, maybe a renter or a leaser of someone else's house. He did not have a lot of cool things. He had no great house or even great apartment. So his invitation into that is both acknowledging where he was humanly in the world as well as openly welcoming people in. Did you notice, too, sometimes the Bible gives us weird details. And every time there's a weird detail, we have to ask ourselves, why on earth? Did you catch this one? It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, right? Well, who cares, right? How's that part of the story? Well, it's part of the story because what happens around that time or there shortly thereafter? It's mealtime, yeah? What Jesus is doing is not just showing them his neck of the woods, he's inviting them to his table. He's having them over for a meal. Now listen, in our society, that's kind of a big deal. In that society, huge deal. Because whoever you let sit at your table is how you define your status in the world. And we find all through the scriptures is Jesus has an open table. He'll invite anyone to his table. No strings attached. This is amazing. But the time also tells us that he wasn't just inviting them over for a meal, but he was actually inviting them over to stay with him. A sleepover of sorts. And ultimately what Jesus is doing is inviting them into the fullness of his life. To not just have a moment, to not just have a meal, but to see how he orients his whole life. What he does and how he lives, to come and walk with him and converse with him and engage with him over time, not just in an instance. This is a massive invitation. Now, I don't know if you're anything like me, but there comes a time when the invitation feels like it ought to be revoked, right? You've invited people over for dinner. Now, this doesn't apply to any of you. Invited people over for dinner. It's 7 o'clock, it's 8 o'clock, it's 9 o'clock, it's 10 o'clock. Oh my gosh, it's 11 o'clock and they're still here, right? Jesus, in essence, is saying, hey, come stay with me as long as you want. This is prolific. This is unthinkable. This is amazing. And as we said before, his invitation is a no strings attached invitation. He doesn't say, hey, you can come over, but only if you're serious about this. Right? You can come over, but only if you sign on the dotted line, you're going to be my follower. You can come over, but only if you're going to get things in order. What we find throughout the whole New Testament is Jesus permits, even acknowledges that people are going to come and go from his presence. He's okay with that. Now, we're going to suggest that true life only comes in his presence, so you don't really want to go. But Jesus is never handcuffing anyone in. He's just inviting us in. No prerequisites, no strings attached, no early promises need to be made. And this is stunning stuff. Even in our relationships today, there are unspoken promises, aren't there? And expectations that come. And yet Jesus makes himself fully available to everyone. Wow. Well, what happens for people who come near to Jesus? We see a couple of things, and we see one thing distinctly in this story. We see another thing implied in this story. So let me talk about what's implied in this story. The first thing that happens when we come near to Jesus is we see who God is. You say, where's that in this story? Well, Jesus did some pretty godlike things in this story. Yeah, he kind of knew people and knew their whole story before they ever came to him. But if, and I would encourage you to do this later on today or sometime during this week, if you read the whole first chapter of John, the story of Jesus begins with the identity of who Jesus is. Right? In the very beginnings of John, it talks about Jesus as the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And it goes on to verse 14. That's what John says here. He says, the Word, that is Jesus, became flesh, and he came and he moved in, he dwelt amongst us. And in so doing, we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. What is John telling us? That in our experience with Jesus, in our seeing and knowing Jesus, we therefore necessarily see and know God. That Jesus is the exact and perfect representation of who God is. If you want to know what God is like, what God is up to in this world, you look nowhere else other than Jesus. Not even the secondary things that people tend to add on to it in the church. Nothing else can do this. No one else can do this. Even if you replace me with the world's greatest preacher ever, whoever you think that may or may not be, he or she would not be able to do this. It's only in proximity to Jesus that we get close to God and see him for who he actually is. But not only does he show us who God is, he shows us who we are. Stunning kind of stuff, right? This interesting story of Nathanael, who's pretty skeptical. So does anything good come from Nazareth? And Philip's like, well, just come and see, right? Again, really important for us as people. People have lots of questions about God or Jesus or the Bible for us as followers of Jesus. And sometimes the best response is not a 30-minute dissertation, but a simple invitation. Well, come and see. Yeah, no strings attached. Explore for yourself. That's what Philip does. Nathanael comes, and what does Nathanael find in Jesus? He finds out who he is, right? Jesus says, oh, you're Nathanael. Amongst all the Israelites, you're true and you're sincere. That is, that Jesus knows him. When we come near to Jesus, we find that he already knows us. Both a comforting and somewhat frightening thought. But his knowing of Nathanael is not just that he knew about him. It's not even just that he remembered his name. It's that he knew his inner character, value, and worth. He knew him. Amazing. The concept is that when we come near to Jesus, Jesus invites us to begin truly knowing who we are. Now, most of us have spent our whole lives trying to define who we are. And Jesus says, I already know who you are. And there's an incredible freedom that begins to be offered when and if we come near to him. In fact, sometimes it means shifting gears. Did you catch what he said to Peter? He said, hey, your name is Simon. We're going to call you Peter. Is that Jesus is giving him new and true identity. Imagine all of the restless hours that we have spent attempting to build an identity for ourselves. The rest that your soul could feel in discovering who you actually are. In Jesus, we find who God is, we find who we are, and then there's this interesting thing at the very end. It says that we find or experience, quote, even greater things, unquote. Amazing. What on earth does that mean? Well, at some level, it necessarily means a greater understanding of who God is and a greater understanding of who we are. But Jesus may give this fascinating picture. He says, listen, heaven will be opened up and you will see angels ascending and descending on the Son of Man. Now, we have to put this in a frame of reference here because we think of heaven in a very different way than the first century world thought of heaven or first century Jewish people thought of heaven. We think of heaven as somewhere north of the clouds, right? And if you've been on a plane, it's even farther than north of the clouds because you've been above the clouds and you weren't there, right? And really what we have in this concept is almost a Platonic reality. And Plato is the one who kind of talks about worlds like this. But in the scriptures, we're taught to almost think dimensionally. That heaven is a place that is other, that we don't have access to because we don't have access to God, because there's separation between us and God. Heaven, what you ought to think of when you hear the word heaven is it's the realm in which God reigns, right? And earth is the realm in which currently human beings reign, or the prince of this world reigns. So what Jesus is saying is that in proximity to him, you gain access to heaven. Right? Now, again, we think of this and we think, oh, that means when I die, I get to go be with God. Yeah, that's part of it. But you have access to it now. His promise to Philip was, you're going to see some of these things now. He didn't say, hey, and when you die, heaven will be opened. Right? In other words, that only in the person of Jesus is the chasm between earth and heaven spanned and covered and full access delivered. And it is quite supernatural. That Jesus necessarily is on a mission of bringing heaven to earth. And it's in the experience of heaven that we actually find the deepest longings of our soul found. Listen, over the next 6 weeks, we're going to talk about all kinds of different things. Belonging, hurt, pain. We're going to talk about worship. All of these different core elements of the church, or of human experience and connection to Jesus and God. And we're going to be asking the question, what would it mean to come near to Jesus in these arenas? In the arena of hurt and pain and longing for healing. In the arena of worship. In the arena of belonging. In the arena of orienting life and obedience. What would it mean not to get religious, not to do, but just to come near to Jesus and experience it in that. And in each of these ways, there's going to be 4 levels almost of coming near to Jesus. The first is for skeptics, right? That Jesus, in his come and see invitation, is offering an invitation to skeptics. Nathanael was one, yeah? The invitation to skeptics is simply this: come and explore. Come and see and explore. No strings attached. If you are skeptical about who Jesus is, or as we get into individual topics in the future, if you're skeptical about who Jesus is in the midst of those topics, that's okay. Jesus is not offering condemnation to that. He's simply giving you an invitation to come near. But here's the truth. You cannot explore who Jesus is from a distance. You have to get proximate to be intellectually honest with your pursuit. In the same way, you can't be a skeptic and have not for yourself explored. So that it's not someone else's exploration of Jesus that you are dependent upon. It's your own. So the invitation of Jesus to anyone who is at some level feeling skeptical is, hey, just come near and see. No strings attached. You can leave when you want to leave. But come close personally and see for yourself. Not some characterization that someone else has made, not some conclusions that someone else has made, but you for yourself. The second call of Jesus would be a call to seekers. You're not a skeptic, but you're seeking. You've identified longings in your heart. And you're seeking their fulfillment. And you feel like Jesus might have something to offer you. The invitation of Jesus to a seeker is to come and see and find. Notice what John the Baptist says to his disciples in identifying Jesus. He says, without calling him by name, he says, there is the Lamb of God. What a strange thing to say, bizarre thing to say. And yet, when he said it, these seekers knew exactly what he meant, and it was exactly what they needed to hear. And they followed after him. Why? Because the people who were looking for a Messiah in the first century Jewish world were looking for a lamb, a fulfillment of Old Testament prophecies, but ultimately the lamb represented for them atonement, forgiveness, reacceptance into God's family and God's ways. That Jesus' invitation is to come near and see what he's actually doing in this world. Seekers, he actually is making all things new and making all things right. He actually is binding up wounds and providing salvation and new life. And there's a third invitation of Jesus to come and see. This, we would say, is a come and see to believers. You would say, I'm no longer a seeker. I've already come to Jesus, and I've found. Okay? Now, again, these words, they carry different levels of meaning. When I say believer, I'm talking in 2 levels, right? One, holistically, you've said, no, I'm a Christian. I'm a Jesus follower. I've believed this Jesus message. Okay, you're a believer. But then each week as we get into these things, you may find out that in that particular zone of life, you're actually a skeptic, even though holistically you're a believer, right? So just remember the kind of reality of it. But the call for believers in each case, and holistically here this morning, is to come and see and follow. Right? Because what Jesus goes on to talk about all through his ministry is that actually the fullness of life that you're longing for, it actually happens most when you follow him in this world. When you live his way and not ordered in a different way. You're not just a Christian because you have believed certain things, but you're a Christian because you have believed and therefore you're following Jesus in this world. Jesus actually, it's a bold thought or a bold statement. He's actually saying, hey, not just in acknowledging who I am, but in following me, like in living my way, in being obedient. That's a hard word for many of us, myself including. is actually how you find freedom. Freedom in obedience. Doesn't make sense. Come and see is the invitation of Jesus. It just might. And then there's the fourth and final call of Jesus. And Jesus' call to what we would call disciples or followers, people who are ordering their life around Jesus and are following them. Jesus calls to come and to see and to join. That is not just to follow, but to now become someone who is joining Jesus in his mission in this world and actually becoming themselves an agent of restoration and healing and new creation in this world. We already see the beginnings of it in this story, don't we? Andrew and Philip, the first two who hear, immediately go do what? Tell their brothers to come and see. They're already joining in Jesus' mission in the world. Jesus, in offering us and these initial disciples a come and see invitation, was not just fully making himself available to them, but he actually was offering an audacious conclusion. He was suggesting that simply by getting proximate to him, you would be able to find the things your soul is searching for. But in his invitation to come and stay with him, he's acknowledging a couple of things, right? It necessarily means that you stay. It necessarily means that you stay present, that you stay engaged, and that you stay curious. Because in so much as we lose one of those things, we lose the pursuit of Jesus for something else. We stay present with Jesus means we stay close and proximate to him. We don't get detoured by other things. We stay engaged means we're not just going through the motions. We are intentional about what we're doing. You stay curious means you haven't said, well, I've got Jesus boxed and understood. No, you allow him to keep showing you who he is and what he's up to in this world. Jesus' promise and offer to you, my suggestion to you this morning is, if you come near to Jesus and do those three things, you will, in fact, find satisfaction for the longings of your soul. In this season, in this community of faith, we are echoing Jesus' invitation. Come and see. No strings attached. And I, as your pastor, if you would call yourself part of this community, am asking you to do some soul searching and to ask yourself, what is my next step of faith? Am I a skeptic? What would it mean to be skeptical but to draw near and examine? Am I a seeker? What would it mean to draw near and actually attempt to find? Am I a believer? What would it mean for me not just to be a Jesus follower in name, but someone who is increasingly obeying Jesus in all things? Am I a Jesus follower? What would it mean for me not to be someone who does the things, but actually joins the mission in the restoration of all things? Today, I ask you that question holistically. I stand here, a much lesser John the Baptist, Adam the preacher, and I say to you, behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. And I encourage you to go and follow him, to see in him who he is, to get near and to find it. And then each week from here on out, as we talk about specific elements of following Jesus or experiencing Jesus, I encourage you to do it in those realms. Can you pray with me? God, call us Augustine, call us C.S. Lewis, call us who we really are. We are searching for true satisfaction, searching for full life, for true joy, for honest to goodness peace, not just a settling of conflict in this world, but like the world as it is truly meant to be. And so, Jesus, we hear from you that you have suggested that in proximity to you, we can know who God is, we can know who we are, and we can have access to heaven. And so my prayer to conclude this teaching is simple. I pray for honesty and integrity in each of the hearts of those who are engaging with this teaching. First and foremost, for me. To ask myself, what do I really think of Jesus? And to identify what next step of faith you're calling me to. God, that is my prayer for everyone who is gathered here today and everyone who will listen to this. That they would see and know you, Jesus, not be distracted, not be conflicted or confused. They would draw near, and that they would find true life. Amen.